It's important to know how to evaluate information well, not just for the purpose of writing a research paper, but also just to be a good friend, a good family member, and a good citizen by not spreading misinformation or disinformation. So misinformation is incorrect, but not necessarily intended to cause harm. Disinformation, on the other hand, is false information that is intentionally misleading and created to cause harm to a person or group. You've probably heard the term fake news a lot. Unfortunately, people have started to use it to refer to any news they simply don't like. As responsible consumers of information, our focus needs to be on whether information contains verifiable facts and how we can determine that. We all can disagree on matters of opinion, but disagreeing with verifiable facts is not really disagreeing. It's just being wrong. So we can find a ton of both misinformation and disinformation on the web, and especially being shared through social media. So the chart in front of you is looking at specifically false stories that were spread during the 2016 presidential campaign season. And this is where Facebook really kind of took a hit for being one of the biggest venues for sharing fake information. And this chart looks at the top 5 fake stories spread on Facebook in terms of engagement. What Facebook considers engagement is anything you do to interact with a story. It's not just that you saw it come across your news feed and maybe read the headline, but you actually did something. Either you shared it, you commented on it, or you did one of the reactions. You liked it or did the angry face or whatever. So in terms of engagement, the top 5 fake stories from that election season, you can see the number 1 story was that Pope Francis had endorsed Donald Trump for president. Now, the point isn't whether the Pope should have or should not have endorsed Donald Trump. That's beside the point. The point is just that it didn't happen. And that matters. This was completely made up. And yet you see that almost 1 million people engaged with this story, not just saw it, but actually did something to interact with it. Who knows how many more people saw it, maybe read the headline, and maybe were influenced by it. So you can see the other top 5 completely made up stories. And then down in blue, this is looking at the total Facebook engagement for the top 20 election stories between August and election day in 2016. And you can see that almost 1.5 million more engagements happened with fake stories than with actual mainstream news stories. And to me, that's just kind of scary. If this is some of the information that people are using to make pretty important decisions, I think that should concern us. And so we want to think about how we can not be contributing to that problem. So we're going to look at a little infographic that kind of gives us some tips and some things that we can try to help us, not just as it says how to spot fake news, but also how to evaluate any information that comes before us, how to think about sources. So the first recommendation is just to consider the source. What is the source? Where is this coming from? See if you can find the name of an organization or person. If you're looking at a website, a lot of times either at the very top or the very bottom, you'll find the name behind the website. You may have to click into something that says about or about us or info or contact or something like that. See if you can find a name, and then you can go Google that name and see if you can find out what kind of organization is this, what's the background, what are they trying to accomplish? Is this maybe actually an organization that's trying to sell something? Do they have some other agenda, or are they just a news organization or educational organization or something like that? Then over to the right, it suggests that you read beyond the headlines. You probably have heard of clickbait, But even a real news story, a legitimate news story, the headline is not designed to be the same thing that a topic sentence is to a paragraph or a thesis statement is to an essay. In other words, it's not the editor sitting down and saying, okay, what one line would be the best summary of what this story is about? Instead, a headline is intended to catch the reader's attention. So, it doesn't mean that the headline is false. It just means that it's just a part of the story that they thought would be the most attention grabbing. And so, if you don't actually read the story itself, you could be missing so much context that you may actually go away believing something that's really the opposite of what the story is trying to say. So just don't think you know something based on just reading a headline. And if you ever read comments on news stories online, you can tell very easily that a lot of the people in the comments did not read the story, or at least you can tell that if you do read the story. So now moving down back over to the left, it says consider the author. This is the same kind of idea as consider the source, where it says check the author. Same idea. Who is behind this? See if you can find a person's name and check out that person, do a search, and see, first of all, is this a real person or is this a fake name that's being used? Is this a known name that's used behind fake news sites? But then not just if they're real, but why should you trust this person to speak on this topic? What authority do they have to speak to this issue? Do they have degrees in the field? Do they have experience working in this subject area? So that's really kind of some of the things you want to think about to determine, should you trust this source? So, for example, you're listening to me right now. Why should you listen to me talk about information literacy? Well, I have a master's in literary and what do I have a master's? I have a master's in library and information science. Good grief. And so that makes me really kind of a credible source to talk about information literacy, even if I stumble over my words doing it. So now going back over to the right, supporting sources. This is talking about when a source will reference another source. So if you read something and it says something like, a recent Harvard study showed, see if you can find that study itself. Whatever they're referencing to, can you find it? Does it actually exist? And if it does exist, does it say what they're claiming it says? Then check the date. It's important to know how current information is, just in general. But when it comes to news stories, even a real news story can become almost fake in the sharing of it, if it's shared as if it's happening right now, when really it's old. And I have a couple of friends on Facebook who are notorious for this. They don't know I use them as an example for classes. But the one in particular, I don't know what kind of outdated news story graveyard he goes to find his social media content. But seriously, it's probably almost on a daily basis that he shares a really outdated story. And he thinks it's happening right now, and he convinces a lot of his friends that it's happening right now. And then I have to be the obnoxious friend who's a reference librarian and go jump in the comments and say, excuse me, so first of all, this is a person who is no longer in office, and the bill that they were trying to get passed never even came up for a vote. This was 12 years ago. This is not happening right now. So don't get all riled up about it, and don't get your friends all riled up about it and start spreading this around. Sometimes what happens is that a conversation will be being had about something happening right now. So let's say that they were, somebody was saying that Ford was moving all of their Michigan plants to Germany. And let's say that they actually did move a plant to Germany 15 years ago. If somebody shares that story from 15 years ago and says, see, it's true that Ford is moving all their plants to Germany, that wouldn't really be a factual way to kind of have that conversation. So just keep an eye on that date. And then, is it a joke? There are sites that are specifically intended for humor, that make up stories, but their purpose isn't really to try to slander somebody or anything like that. It's really just to poke fun at an idea or something like that, to be parody. And a lot of times sites like that will self-identify. So if you look around enough on the site, they may not make it super obvious right away, but if you look around, usually it will say that it is a satire or parody or humor site or something like that. After this video, there will be another video that will share some resources that you can use for source evaluation and for fact checking. And one of the resources I'll point you to is a site that you can use specifically to check whether a website is satire or a real site, or I should say a news site. And then check your biases. This is one of the, I would say, top 2 reasons that misinformation and disinformation are able to spread so easily. The other reason is simply because it's a moneymaker. People have discovered that, of course, if they can get a lot of people to click on to their website, they can then sell advertising based on that click rate. And it can be a good way for them to make money. And the way to get a lot of clicks sometimes is to come out with some outlandish stories that tend to really grab people's attention and maybe, again, get them riled up, either in support of or against whatever the story is about. And so that's one of the reasons that it spreads so well. But the other main reason is because of something called confirmation bias. And that is where, if you see something that seems to confirm something that you already believe or want to believe, you are probably much more likely to just take it as at face value, believe it right away. We all, of course, have certain opinions, things that we believe in, things that we are for and that we're against, and people we support and people we're against, and all that kind of stuff. And that's normal and fine. The danger is, like I said, where you just automatically assume something is true because it fits what you want to believe. So let's say, for example, there's a negative story about someone you already dislike. You are probably much more likely to just accept it at face value and be like, yep, see, of course he would do that. Terrible guy, knew it. On the other hand, if you saw a negative story about someone that you like and support, you probably would be much more likely to take a step back and say, wait a minute, did this really happen? I don't feel like this person would do this. You would be skeptical. And I'm encouraging you to be skeptical of everything. Absolutely everything. Take that step back and ask yourself, is this true? And how do I know that it's true? And then finally it says ask the experts, ask a librarian, hey, or consult a fact-checking site. And again, that other video that I referenced will give you some suggested fact-checking sites that you can use. And one more thing I want to show you is this Beyond Fake News, 10 types of misleading news. This will also be linked in the place that I will show you in that other video so that you can take a closer look at it. I would just scroll through and just kind of take a look at some of these different types of misleading information that you can find out there when looking on the web.